The content you're about to hear may be graphic in nature. Listener discretion is advised.
Oh, how I wonder what it's like to relax. See the sky down under. Hope my plans collapse. Oh, how I'm under the surface of my tears, falling down asunder the meaning of my years.
This is True Crime XS.
So we were just doing a series on an unclosed homicide, and we have to sort of separate this episode from that. So you and I are going to do that, and we're just going to tell you the story of a guy named Bill who's tied to Chinatown in Chicago. We have dug pretty deep into this particular individual, and I can tell you that, he really pops on the criminal radar in January of 1987. On the first Friday in January of 1987, he robs a bank. He gets caught. The way that this goes down is one of those things that, if the situation we were talking about weren't so serious, there's an element of this that I would find hilarious. Because this person is clearly not a very good criminal. You can track this to the Chicago Tribune. And on Sunday, January 11th, a guy named Jerry Crimmins wrote a blurb on the crime page, on page 28 of the Chicago Tribune. And it just says, "Real crash ends fake gun robbery." Two Chicago men who allegedly robbed a Burbank savings institution last week, apparently using a fake gun as their only weapon, were arrested after they smashed their car while trying to escape, according to police. In arresting the suspects, Robert L. Kennedy, 27, of 4609 South Emerald Avenue, and William R. Swiderski, 27, of 533 West 40th Place, police found a plastic replica of a .357 Magnum pistol. The incident began about 11:30 a.m. Friday when two men entered United Savings of America at 5750 West 87th Street, and this is according to the Burbank police chief, Robert Erickson. He says that one guy jumped up on the countertop, he pointed a gun at everybody, and he demanded money. The police chief said that there were 6 tellers present at the time. The robbers grabbed what they could, and they got out of there. According to the chief, they were in and then out in about a minute and a half. Erickson said that one witness had seen two men circle the building before entering and became suspicious. When the men ran out, the witness called police and described their getaway car as a blue sedan. Officer Robert Catcher, 29, responded to the call and saw a blue sedan coming toward him eastbound on 87th Street and then turning north up Long Avenue. Officer Catcher pursued the car and was eventually joined by another squad car driven by Commander William Kajawa, who's 40, and Sergeant Larry McDonald, 42. Erickson said that the suspects discovered while going east on 81st Street that the street had ended at Lehman Avenue. Their vehicle failed to make the turn onto that street and crashed into a garage. The two then fled on foot, were pursued by officers to 80th and Laverne Avenue. The officers drew their guns and ordered the suspects to halt. The suspects lay on the ground and were arrested. In the pockets of one, the officers found $3,200. We believe that's how much they took. They didn't get a chance to get rid of any of the money. So that's where we start off with this guy, William Swiderski. At this point in time, in 2024, we've done a ton of looking into Mr. Swiderski. he doesn't really stay out of prison very long. Do you think that's an accurate description?
Yes, it is. Did you give the date on that?
January 11th of 1987 is when the article ran. I said first, but I think it's the second Friday that this happened. So it would have been January the 9th.
Right, of 1987.
Yep, 1987.
Okay, so that's kind of where the information starts, right?
Yes. And I think that's important to mention because generally speaking, we're dealing with a crime that happened in January in that series that we covered. Well, William Swiderski ends up getting sued by the bank at that time, as well as his co-defendant. And you would think that spending a little time in jail and being sued by a bank would dissuade you from committing future crimes. That's the whole point of the rehabilitation part of the Department of Corrections in every jurisdiction. Unfortunately, that is not what happened. And in October of 1992, another warrant was issued for William Swiderski. This time he had recruited 2 different accomplices to assist him in a new bank robbery. Those accomplices were Alan Lee Mendenhall and Terry Lofton. I bring all of this up because it's kind of important. In the scope of everything that's happening here, we had to kind of backtrack and use PACER to a degree, because this guy, he really doesn't commit that many, quote, local crimes that he's convicted of. But these federal crimes, they stick. And Meg and I are able to track through PACER pretty much everything that happens to him. So the complaint is filed in October on the 8th in 1992. An arrest warrant is issued the same day for the 3 gentlemen I just mentioned. And they are arrested. And by the time October 26th rolls around, they are appointed counsel. And on October 28th, William Raymond Swiderski makes his first appearance in court. In PACER, you can find the financial affidavits. You can find that he did receive an attorney. He's indicted in November of 1992, the week before Thanksgiving. He is indicted there. Alan Lee Mendenhall is indicted. Terry Lofton is indicted. And they are held without bond. There's a detaining order in there from the magistrate basically saying that they're going to hold on to these guys. They receive their arraignment notice, and they start to put together what is going to be a trial. But along the way, essentially everyone turns on everyone. In December of 1992, so William Swiderski has pled not guilty to robbing a bank. He's informed of his rights in this December 28th, 1992 hearing before the Honorable Charles Kokoris, who's the judge in this matter. And once he's informed of his rights, he withdraws his not guilty plea and enters a plea of guilty to the first count in his indictment. The case is then ordered over to the probation department of the U.S. government. This is not a local Chicago case, for a pre-sentencing investigation report. And they set a status hearing for March of 1993. And this guy is basically going to sit here. The co-conspirators are going to make statements between Christmas of 92 and Valentine's Day of 1993. And those are all going to be entered into evidence in February of 1993. Initially, they set sentencing for March the 1st, related to William Raymond Swiderski pleading guilty. They end up having to reset the sentencing to April the 20th. And then there's some questions over the paperwork, kind of hammering out details and some both grammatical errors and legal argument errors. So the court kicks the plea agreement back out and says, you guys need to go fix this. On April 13th of 1993, the judge grants the government's motion to reject plea agreements for them. This is being granted means whatever happens, we're going to vacate it. So the judge ends up vacating both the defendant's pleas and the judgment that they were about to put forth, and a status hearing gets set for April the 20th again. So on April the 20th, a plea agreement is entered for William Swiderski. And the general error is there were 2 counts of robbery related to this bank robbery. And he is withdrawing a plea to count 1 and entering a plea of not guilty, but then entering a guilty plea on count 2. He's informed of his rights again, and another pre-sentencing investigation is drawn up, but now it's related to the second count on this indictment. That sounds a little goofy in court speak, but the bottom line is they were correcting an error of which charge William Raymond Swiderski was going to plead out to. On May the 12th of 1993, Judge Kokoris issues a sentencing order for William Swiderski, and he sentences him to the custody of the United States Bureau of Prisons. And he's going to be in prison for a term of 235 months, which is 19 and a half years. This is on count 2 of his indictment. Upon release from his imprisonment, the defendant is going to have to be on supervised release. So he's going to have a probation and parole officer for a term of 5 years. He also ends up with an order for restitution and forfeiture. Basically, fruits of what have happened here are forfeited back to the court to be distributed to the victims, and he's ordered to pay some restitution. The next morning, the judge writes a commitment to the U.S. Marshals, and William Swiderski starts to make his path off to prison. There's a sealed document entered on June 21st, and I couldn't tell you what that is. I am interested in it, and I have not been able to find it. Later in the year, on December 9th of 1993, there is a motion by the state and by counsel for William Swiderski to modify the restitution order so that he can increase his monthly payments. That motion is granted, and the court orders the defendant to pay each month towards this restitution while in custody. And they mail him notice on this. It's not something that he comes back to. But essentially, any earnings that he has, 50% of those earnings will go towards the restitution in this order. By January of 1998, the court reviews this order and they keep it in place. And May 18th of 2006, they enter a full satisfaction for the restitution order related to William Swiderski, indicating that he paid back $7,289 over the course of this. I mention this here because do you notice the jump in time, Meg?
Yes.
So essentially, from 1992 until 1993, we're kind of working out the details of what's going to happen to this guy. And in 93, he is sentenced to pay restitution, to forfeit assets, and to spend 20 years in prison. This guy should not see the light of day before May of 2013 because his probation and parole is set. And honestly, if you look through the history of U.S. probation and parole, so that's federal probation and parole, they do away with federal probation and federal parole at different times over the years. But because of how things go for William Swiderski, he is able to be released. After serving 16 years and just under 7 months, William Swiderski is released on December the 4th of 2009. We don't hear much about him at this time, but I can tell you that doing background work on him and tracking his movements, I traced him to Rockdale, Illinois, and I traced him to having a P.O. box that opened in late 2009 in Chinatown in Chicago. For some strange reason, in March of 2010, William Swiderski has a very strange motion hearing that he does not attend, but his probation officer ends up requesting to modify the conditions of his release for the term of supervision and has a consent order with him, meaning that William Swiderski signed off on whatever the probation officer is asking for the court to modify. So Will Smith, his probation officer, requests to add the condition to his supervision that the offender shall participate in the mental health treatment program at the direction of the probation officer. This is signed off on and entered on March 25th, 2010, which means at some point in early to mid-March, the probation officer saw something that made him want to put Swiderski in a mental health program. It took time to get that on the docket, and by the point that we're talking about it at the end of March, the judge has already signed off on it.
Right, because William Swiderski agreed to it, essentially. That's what a consent order is.
Right.
It's just making it official within the court, right?
Right. The next thing that happens with Swiderski on paper is that in late 2011, an article pops up on twincities.com. Now, it pops up in December of 2011 initially. But it turns out that William Swiderski has been sort of on the run. The article itself is by Elizabeth Moore. She was writing for the Pioneer Press at the time up there at twincities.com. And you could read it. It's got an updated date of November 12, 2015. But here's what the article says. It says that an Illinois fugitive wanted for rape is caught in Washington County. An Illinois rape suspect and fugitive is in custody in Washington County after federal and local authorities tracked them down in Scandia. It says, William Raymond Swiderski, 52, is accused of raping a woman at knife point in the village of Rockdale on Tuesday. That's according to a statement from the U.S. Marshal's Office, by the way. He reportedly used a knife during the rape and was believed to be in possession of a gun when he fled. Authorities received tips leading them to believe Swiderski was hiding out in rural Washington County. He was arrested on Wednesday night following a traffic stop conducted by Washington County Sheriff's officers and the Minnesota State Patrol helicopter. Swiderski is currently on probation for a federal bank robbery conviction, according to the U.S. Marshal's statement. He's being held in the county jail on a $2 million bail. All right, follow all that?
Yep.
According to court records, William Swiderski held his roommate at knife point and sexually assaulted them, and he kept a record of this. He is eventually going to plead out to this, and he is going to receive a very long sentence. The victim was 38 years old at the time, and Bill or William Raymond Swiderski was 52 years old at the time of the offense. He's going to end up with 2 convictions of criminal sexual assault by force. And he's going to be required to be on the sex offender registry. By the time this all happens, he is listed at 6'2", 250 pounds. I think it's October 2014 they put him on the sex offender registry, like as a registrant, so to speak. He does have a current picture on there from 2023, I believe. It's interesting. While he's in jail, Will Smith, his probation officer there in Chicago, he files a motion in the United States District Court for the Northern District of Illinois in the Eastern Division. Here's what he runs down. This is called the defendant's position regarding violation of supervised release. So when you get arrested and held on $2 million bail, your probation officer is going to investigate because it's highly likely that you have violated the terms of your release. This is a very serious sexual assault.
I'm just curious. I don't think it's possible for you to be arrested and not have violated it.
Okay, so that's a really technical thing. Yes, you could actually be arrested and not have violated your probation, but the conviction is definitely going to be a violation.
Okay.
Like you could be accused of something or be in the wrong place at the wrong time, or the truth is a police officer could be investigating something And when they learn you're on probation, it might become probable cause to detain you if it's a similar crime or proximity thing.
Okay.
Like, there's a
Yeah.
number of reasons. Like I've seen people get a probation violation just for the arrest, and I've seen people only get it for the conviction. It depends on the jurisdiction of the judge. And like I do know, like, some of the places I'm most familiar with have gone to quick dip programs. So what they'll do is they'll pick you up on the violation, even if your sentence is 3 years or 10 years or something that you're supposed to serve. What they'll do is they'll just drop you in jail for the weekend, warn you, and like, that's your quote violation. But they tell you at that violation hearing, when they sentence you to the 2 days or 3 days or whatever, that if you're convicted of the crime, that you're going back and you're also going to serve that sentence.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So this motion is interesting. It's a little weird, but it's to Charles Kokoris, and it's by Will Smith from the probation department. It's an 8-page document, but the first part's just a cover sheet, and I'm just going to run through it. It says, Defendant William Swiderski in the Federal Defender Program and the attorney for the Federal Defender Program, Sergio Rodriguez, submit a position paper as to violations of supervised release. Mr. Swiderski requests that his appearance be waived at any hearing and sentencing for the violations of supervised release. He respectfully requests that any period of punishment be ordered to be served concurrently with the 16-year sentence he received in criminal court in Illinois. In support, the defendant states as follows. Mr. Swiderski was originally convicted and sentenced by this court on one count of armed bank robbery and received a sentence of 235 months plus 5 years of supervised release. That's attached to our December 6, 2013 special report. On December 23, 2011, a special report was issued detailing new criminal charges in the state of Illinois. Mr. Swiderski is currently incarcerated in Menard Correctional Center in Menard, Illinois. On May 21st of 2013, Mr. Swiderski pled guilty and was convicted in the Illinois Circuit Court in Will County of criminal sexual assault and sentenced to 16 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections. His projected parole date is March 4th, 2039. Okay, right there I have a major math issue. You follow me?
Yes.
A hearing is scheduled before this court for December 19th. December 19th is 2013. And that's going to be an AM court thing. The second section of this motion says that the Rules 32 and Rule 43 of the Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure permit a defendant to waive his presence at his revocation and sentencing hearings. Mr. Swiderski's case, it can be resolved without Mr. Swiderski's presence. And then they restate the rules, and they just basically explain that these rules make it so that all of this can take place while the defendant is in custody elsewhere. Part 3, the defendant's position. In a letter just received by counsel dated December 10, 2013, Mr. Swiderski writes, and I have a copy of this, it's pretty close to what they put here. I, William Swiderski, is writing this letter to state I agree with the U.S. probation violation recommendation of 33 to 41 months custody and 1 year supervision to run consecutive to my current state sentence. I will not argue against this, and I do not wish to be present for any hearing. Counsel has not been able to arrange a telephone call with Mr. Swiderski to go over his rights to confirm what is in this letter. The letter is attached as Exhibit 1. It is clear from his letter that he does not desire to attend any hearing, but it is unclear whether he recognizes that, at least theoretically, Mr. Swiderski, through counsel, can request that his sentence on the violation be run concurrent and not consecutive to a state sentence. Because the crime he committed is a violent offense, he will not receive day-for-day credit for the sentence he received in state court. That is why his projected parole date is not until 2039. This is plenty of punishment for his actions. Wherefore, counsel on behalf of Mr. Swiderski requests that the sentence be run concurrent, or in the alternative, that the case be continued for a short period to allow counsel to contact the defendant. And then it references the Federal Defender Program. It's actually not even being written by his counsel. It's being written on behalf of his counsel. And they attach the letter at the bottom that he does not wish to be present for anything. And then it closes out with the typical court documents that sort of affirm all of this is, official. What did you think of that?
It sounded to me like somebody that was running away from something the best that they possibly could while in prison.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this guy is running as far and as fast as he could to get away from something. And it is my opinion, only my opinion, if I were to speculate really hard on all of this, that William Swiderski is running away from a murder charge.
Or being confronted with a murder.
He does not want to be confronted with a murder. I would agree that is also something he is trying to run away from. Here's my thoughts on William Swiderski. I have read, he has written on the internet like little poetry assignments for whatever they're doing for him in prison. I do not have any direct ill will towards William Swiderski right now. I think that he is a murderer, but I also think that William Swiderski's records have been withheld from me. I cannot look at disciplinary actions. I can't listen to his phone calls. I can't find a good reason that the officers I've talked to who are relatively convinced that William Swiderski is a murderer and also a serial sexual offender, I don't have anything that proves it to me otherwise. So I reached out to him. I reached out to talk to him through the Connect services of the Illinois Department of Corrections. Now, right now, William Swiderski is in Pinckneyville, Illinois. He's not having a very rough life there. He's just in prison, which is not great. But he does not seem to want to talk to me about the questions I have. So I thought I would tell his story for him here today because, in my opinion, he's a murderer. The Chicago police think that he's a murderer. The Indiana State Police think that he's a murderer. The Will County Prosecutor's Office think that he's a murderer. The Cook County State's Attorney's Office think that he's a murderer. I think that he's a murderer. And I think behind bars, he's an abuser. I don't know what the next step is to have William Swiderski be considered to be Bill from Chinatown, but I can tell you this. He gets out in December of 2009. Jay Polhill goes missing in early 2010, and his body is found shortly thereafter. William Swiderski was a white guy in Chinatown. Bill from Chinatown's name and phone number were found on a Post-it note by Jane Polhill when she was cleaning out her dead son's dorm room at his college. And she turned it over to the police. And at the time, the police believed that it was possible Jay Polhill had killed himself and jumped into the river. The file on Jay Polhill is referenced as being 1.5 to 2 inches thick. And I haven't read it all. But I have talked to several of the people that put that file together. I have it on good authority that William Swiderski is a confession away from spending the rest of his life in prison, and that they did the best they could on the sexual assault and the criminal aggravated sexual assault charges to put him in there for as long as they could. But until he is charged with the murder of Jay Polhill and gets his trial and his day in court, nothing will convince me otherwise that he did not pretend to be a military person who's, I guess, deployed to prison and wanted to take some pictures in his military uniform. So he took advantage of a 20-year-old college student in Chicago, Illinois, by dangling $500 out as a photography fee to come and do a session. I think that Jay packed up his gear, took his phone, his camera, his computer, and he went to take pictures of this guy. So this guy who claimed to be in the military, Bill from Chinatown, would have photos to share of him in his uniform, except there was no uniform. I think Jay Polhill probably died almost instantly when confronted by William Swiderski when they met. And I think William Swiderski was too cowardly to complete the act of disposing of his body by dismembering him. And I think he resorted to putting him in the Calumet River because it's all he could do. I don't think that Jay Polhill was scared or felt a lot of pain, but I do think that the reason that is true is because William Swiderski assaulted him, rendered him unconscious, and as you guys heard in the earlier episodes, I think those injuries that Meg and I referenced as being homicidal in nature were caused by William Swiderski. Can I prove it? No. I think there's enough information at the Cook County's attorney's office that they can prove it. But you know what? I'm totally okay if William Swiderski wants to come on and tell a story. I'm totally okay if he just wants to email and tell me he didn't do it. But until I'm told otherwise, I cannot not believe that William Swiderski is a murderer and that there's not anything else to be done with the evidence except for us to sit here and wait for him to confess. Jay Polhill's a priority for me. This limited series is all about him. His life meant something to a lot of people. It apparently didn't mean anything to William Swiderski, who is Bill from Chinatown. I don't want people to think that they can get away with murder. And I don't really understand what's going to happen with him. Actually, that's not true. I do understand what's going to happen with him. He is old, fat, white, and protected in prison. He's going to die in there. How old is he now, Meg? 60-something? 65?
1959, so he'll be 65.
He is a 65-year-old criminal. And honestly, he's in exactly the place he needs to be.
He's a murderer.
He's a murderer. I don't know what is wrong with the man. I cannot tell you how angry I am about this entire case. It's sad, but it's also anger-inducing. The reason it's anger-inducing is because he's right there. They know where he is. They know who the suspect is.
Right, and we had come to this independent conclusion before it was verified. We're not the only ones who know this. Right?
Yeah, it's verified by all of the investigators and the state's attorney at this point. They've all verified it. They tried to work out a plea deal on this case when he was going down for the Wills County case. They were having to make a sacrifice there that like he was going to get a shorter sentence for one thing, and they didn't know what the sentence would be for the Cook County case, it's not the Cook County case. It's Jay Polhill's murder. So they made what is I get why they made the decision they made. Like, I understand parts of it. They essentially don't get the confession from Bill Swiderski, but they get this long sentence where he is going to spend at the time he's 52-ish years old. So he's going to spend basically the rest of his life in prison, whether he wants to or not. Because if it's 2024 and he's going to be 65 and he's not getting out until 2039 for probation and parole to take him, that's another 15 years. He's going to be 80. But he gets to live to be 80. And there is no death penalty on the table here. I totally understand that. I just want people to know that William Swiderski killed Jay Polhill.
Right. And honestly, I get the strategy. Well, I sort of get the strategy behind why he hasn't been charged, but he needs to be charged with it. He needs to be held accountable for it. He shouldn't get out. I don't feel like the guy's going to live until he's 80 years old. But if he does, he needs to not get out.
Well, like we talked about this. You and I talked a lot off mic about this guy and what to do about him. I'll go ahead and say this. There's this case in a neighboring state to this, in Indiana, where they're talking about Odinism and hedonism and Wotanism being applied to a double homicide from 2017 there. It's sort of this, it's considered to be sort of an outlandish defense theory there. A lot of that stuff is true here. This guy has the Viking tattoos that he clearly got in prison. He's spent the bulk of his life in prison. I don't know how to explain it, like the supremacy element to all of this to people without just starting to sound like a lunatic. But this guy's sort of protected in prison, or has people in prison that are like watching his back to some degree. I would like to end that. I would like for him to basically be in some kind of solitary confinement for the rest of his life for what he did to Jay. I don't get to make that decision.
I was going to say, I'm okay with it going through the process. Like,
I would rather it go through the process. And here's what I decided, I think. And like, if we come up with a different ending, I'll put it in here. But this is what I think I decided. Meg had a really good idea. The Wrongful Death Act in Illinois, basically 2 years from somebody's death, you can sue someone. And, the goal there is money and responsibility for a death that has occurred for a number of reasons. There's a whole list. I think it's under Illinois 740 / Wrongful Death Act. But there are exceptions for that. Homicide is one of those exceptions. All the types of homicide to a person or an unborn person, the way it's written up. I would say that if somebody out there is listening to this and you are in a position in Illinois, if William Swiderski were to be charged, even if it's based on the evidence that is in front of them and they need to bring him in and get that final confession, it opens up the possibility for what's known as a Slayer ending to this. And a Slayer ending is when a judge in a wrongful death case hears from attorneys, one would be for William Swiderski, the other would be for the family. In this instance, it would be for Jay Polhill, for his family. And the judge makes a decision of whether or not William Swiderski is responsible for his death. This is a civil decision that he makes. He declares him the slayer. Now, sometimes it's done for money, but William Swiderski doesn't have anything. What this will do by having him declared the slayer of Jay Polhill, it would be to hold him accountable for taking the life of a 20-year-old college student. And if we can't hold people like that accountable, I don't even know what I'm doing anymore.
Right. If a 20-year-old can go off to college and be murdered, and his murderer can get away with it, even though we know who it is, it appears that a lot of people know who killed him, but nothing's been done for various excuse-driven reasons, right? Our justice system has completely failed.
Yeah, our justice system failed Jay Polhill and his family in this instance.
Completely did. And I feel like in this particular situation, that was my latest thought, was because the statute of limitations is told to when if someone's criminally charged.
Yeah.
And so I feel like lacking the specific evidence for a conviction, which I'm not so sure there's not enough evidence there. Okay. I would have to see more information than I'm privy to. I feel like there might be enough.
Yeah, I think things have changed enough. I think you're right. There's enough digital evidence and this, we know it's there. We talked to the people who handed it over to the police, and we talked to the police. So, the phone records are there. That to me is enough.
They are, right. Yeah. And I feel like, a prosecutor has to make the decision about when they have enough to charge. I can't remember. This didn't go to grand jury, right?
If it went to grand jury, no one has mentioned that to me. I tried to get that information out of both of the prosecutors. So I say both of the prosecutors because the assistant state's attorney's office had this case in Cook County, but the suspect was going away for a crime that affected it occurred in another jurisdiction. So a neighboring county basically had him. And I tried to get the story there to see if that was as far as it got, and I think it is. No one has said to me, we took it to the grand jury, they said no.
Right. And so I understand that there are certain aspects of cases that are evaluated by who would ultimately end up being the prosecutor, if the indictment was procured from a grand jury, right? And I understand that. I feel like for whatever reason, and I think it's largely just because the perpetrator is in jail for other reasons, and they felt like that was enough. Clearly, that is never going to be enough because he murdered a 20-year-old college student and essentially, for all intents and purposes, got away with it.
He did. He did.
And that's absolutely unacceptable. And until it has exhausted all the, because granted, it's my impression this is not an active case, right? It's not a closed case, but nobody's working on this case. Nobody's working on this case.
No, nobody's working on it because they've done all the work. Like the only thing left is like, and that's another thing that technically could be done. If you happen to know a cold case detective, either with the Illinois State Police or the Chicago Police, maybe even Cook County Sheriff, but I doubt it. If you know someone there and can convince someone to go in and to make like an attempt to get him to confess, because we were at a point here, I considered paying him for the information just to get him to say it, but then it's kind of tainted and useless. So there's, I've run down so many different rabbit holes on this. Like, how do you get this guy to talk? I thought I had him at one point. I thought in messages, I thought he was going to unburden himself. But I guess like when you practice a fake religion and like do fake things to live your fake life behind bars and pretend to get through every day, like you don't really care much about giving people closure.
Right. And again, as long as I need a grand jury to say, no, we're not going to indict him. I need him to be indicted and a jury of his peers to say, no, there's not enough evidence, right? I don't feel like those avenues have been fully explored. And I feel like it was some snap decisions made at the beginning that caused the investigation not to be as thorough as it should be. There was an investigation done. There is some evidence there. I'm not so sure that it's not enough evidence. However, being criminally charged gives the opportunity for the civil suit to be brought for Jay's wrongful death. And I feel like that could be leveraged.
All we really want is for him to be held accountable. We want William Swiderski to be proclaimed by a judge that he is the murderer of Jay Polhill.
And I'm kind of at a loss as to why we're even having to talk about this.
So, there's some reluctance here. It's interesting. Jay is one of the invulnerable. He is a 20-year-old college male. And you and I talk about them a lot, especially the ones that are more athletic and outgoing. We talk about the fact that like they're sort of forgotten. That's the whole point of the series in some ways. And I think, look, there are a couple different ways to go here. And now I'm getting I said I think he killed him, but now I'm getting the accusations as to what else happened. If Jay were a 20-year-old female college student, he would have 10 podcasts about him and be on 20/20 and 48 Hours and everything else, where like for some reason that young girl would be in the spotlight. Because Jay is a 20-year-old male, he's sort of overlooked. And I don't understand. I've wondered, because in talking to the different investigators, I asked, and like, I hate to say this because I know his family is going to listen to this, but I said, is there a possibility that Jay was sexually assaulted? Would that make it like we're doing all these initiatives to close these cold case sexual assaults around the country, especially the ones that resulted in homicides? Like, would that push it forward? And nobody had an answer to me. But at least one of the investigators said, look, as far as I'm concerned, I think that's the direction this was headed. Like whether it got there or not, I think we would have evidence of it, but I don't know because I wasn't the first investigator on this. So it's kind of like you're saying early on when you just got this John Doe, he shows up with no pants in the river in March.
Right, but they immediately classified his death as a suicide.
Yeah.
And that's where it began to fall apart. And, we talked from the very beginning about how Chicago is a it's laden with gun violence driven homicide cases, right?
Correct.
And it's very straightforward. Most of the cases are very straightforward. It's, one bad dude shooting another bad dude, or one person who knows the other person shooting the other person, right? It's very straightforward. And under the circumstances, for whatever reason it was, they chose to say this was a suicide, even though the medical examiner never said that.
Correct.
And the information provided to us at this point, which is 14 years later, like, nothing about it says suicide to me. Initially, looking at what was available before we spoke with Jane, the only question it seemed to be was if it was a suicide or some sort of accident, right? It's incredibly strange.
Yeah, I mean, so we ended up taking this case because Jane Polhill reached out to me, and I had a 20-year-old kid at the time that she reached out to me. And the fact that my kid was 20 made me think about it more. I had passed over Jay's case originally when I was looking at something else, which we discussed in sort of the smiley-faced episode of this. But, I want to tell everybody something. I called this an unclosed homicide the whole time that we've been talking about it. Because one of the important things to remember here is that ultimately Jane Polhill solved her son's homicide. She was the one who found the Post-it note and had kept in enough touch with her son that she could link it all together so that when investigators did get interested, they could go back and they had someone to look at based on that Post-it note with a name and a phone number. She solved it. And I think that's like a really important thing to remember in all of this, because she and her family live every day without Jay. But she was able to solve her own son's homicide. Now all she wants is for the system, which some of the pieces have worked and some of them haven't, not to fail, but to close her son's case.
Special consideration was given to True Crime Excess by LabrottieCreations.com. If you have a moment in your favorite app, please go on and give us a review or a 5-star rating. It helps us get noticed in the crowd. This is True Crime XS.
You fall like the stars. I break things like guitars. Thick skin, no scars. We're in trouble, we took it too far. I don't want to go, but it's 'cause I'll disappoint ya. It's all I've ever dreamed of, something I cannot let go of. I hate the competition, this culture's like a gym, and I lost the motivation to get fit in your expectations.
True Crime Excess is brought to you by John and Meg. It's written, produced, edited, and posted by John and Meg. You can always support True Crime Excess through Patreon.com, or if you have a story you'd like them to cover, you can reach them at TrueCrimeAccess.com. Thank you for joining us.
As much as it pains me to say it, I'll keep following this case. I'll keep sending out the information. I will be trying to get someone to listen to it, but that's it for now. The best thing that you can do for Jay Polhill is if you see his name and a story about him, comment that William Swiderski is someone that we should talk about. I see him from time to time on the internet on different forums. I see his name pop up. Here's what you can do. If you're just a person listening to this, go Google Jay Polhill's name with quotes around it and read the articles from Columbia College, from his friends over the years that have talked about him and remembered him fondly. Check out the different blogs that talk about him. Give his name views. Make sure that he gets as high in the search engine optimization as he can, because that's what I'm going to do. And just remember that there's a guy out there. He may be in prison, but he is getting away with the murder of a 20-year-old college student. And everyone should be outraged by that.